This week's episode is brought to you by Doug, Frederick, and Julia, this week's newest patrons. Thank you. Cheap is a relative term, I know, and while I can't promise you that my personal version of cheap is going to be the same as yours, what I can promise you is that this episode is going to make some people very, very angry. Well, we are going to look at some cool boats today. More importantly, we're going to cover a couple of concepts about boat life and cruising, and we're going to upset the establishment just a little bit. I can't wait to see you in the comments after this video. This week on Everything You Need to Know, the best cheap sailboat for solo cruising. To stay cheap for our solo cruising sailboat, we're going to have to make a few compromises, of course. Because we need it to be cheap, we're not going to be able to be too picky about where we buy it from, what location. We have to be willing to go get it, or maybe get our butts to wherever the boat is and move on board and start from there. We also have to cross off a few pretty big creature comforts to sort of keep that cost down, namely the aft cabin in sugar scoop boats. As soon as you look at boats with an aft cabin and a sugar scoop, the price jumps dramatically. So what is our budget then? A cheap boat for me, something you can say sail from the Great Lakes or the East Coast, New York, Annapolis, all the way to Grenada and back by yourself with some semblance of safety is going to be anywhere from about $20,000 to about $40,000 US dollars. This is where opinions are gonna differ, and some folks are already warming up their caps lock key with the no better than thou opinions to start running roughshod over the comments on this video. But hear me out before you do. Sure, there are a lot of $100,000 boats that are gonna do this job pretty nicely, but you're a single person without that kind of money. So what you lack in money, you're going to have to make up for elsewhere. You'll be the person who's willing to do the work to make the boat as seaworthy as she can possibly be. And you're willing to do the research and perform the best you possibly can to be the safest captain that you can be. And you're going to be willing to put in the time to learn and hone your skills, whether it's through racing or ASA or just practice before you ever set keel in the big waters. Take this boat, for example. Here we have a very solo manageable 37-footer from 1988. It's not even that terribly old, and they want $39,000 for it, and it's a Pearson. Pearson is very well known for being well made, a thick boat that usually sails to a fairly high standard. Last year, in fact, the boat I crew on took third place overall, and it's a Pearson 30. And at first glance, this 37-footer has a lot going for it. It's a whopping 16,000 pounds, and while being small enough to solo sail, it also gives us a lot of deck space, gives us opening hatches and door aids, but it's all very simple. We get a standard roller up front for the jib, and a regular old mainsail cover on the back. It's the fairly standard cockpit too. We get wheel steering, a lot of albeit dated Raymarine equipment, big primary and smaller secondary winches. We even get a walk-through sort of flip-down transom deal, which is actually a pretty big deal on a boat at this price point. We even already have some solar panels up there and built-in protection with the Dodger and Bimini. And what's important here is that all the framing for that stuff is already done. So even if the sunbrella is toast, a budget-minded solo cruiser should be happy enough to learn how to replace that sunbrella with a borrowed sewing machine and lots of elbow grease. Inside this Pearson, they keep it simple, but also very livable with some actually pretty cool features for this price point and this size of boat. We get a very simple saloon area with an interesting bench sort of thing on starboard where they have a TV and what looks like a bar fridge installed. Again, budget cruising. It would suggest that the original factory fridge isn't working, so you may need to learn some new skills with HVAC to make this operational again if you want, or you can spend a few $100s on a 12-volt Dometic or something like that. Up front, we get a very cool V-berth area with this semi-walk-around bed, which is outstanding on a 37-footer. You don't see this. Ask me how I know. I've got a boat like this, and it does not have a bed that's that cool. I'm not seeing any water damage here under the port lights or on the floor. It all looks to be in pretty good shape for the 39 grand they want. Heading aft, we get a dedicated nav desk. Again, kind of a rarity on these. It's got a chair, and then the door to the head is across from what's actually a pretty decent sized galley. For the solo cruiser, I think this is more than enough to actually work with. All in all, this is a very livable space for solo cruising. And the head even has a separate shower. I think we're getting a little bit spoiled with this boat. For 39 grand, this is actually a very nice option. And for the goal we have in mind, it'll do a really good job. But let's be clear about something here. This boat doesn't have an EPIRB or an SSB, an Iridium, or even a life raft. And in the budget that we have, we're not going to be able to install any of those things either. Now, some folks would say, I would never be caught dead out at sea for weeks on end by myself without all those safety items. And I agree with you. I wouldn't either. But we aren't going to be out at sea for all those weeks on end. Are we? We're just going to be going to Grenada and back, and there's not really any bigger hops than 60 or 80 nautical miles in between land on that path. Now, do you need an EPIRB and a life raft to do an 80-mile hop? I often get flack for saying this, but I think there is a genuine place in the cruising world to safely travel on these cheaper, smaller boats without all those toys and safety items, provided you take all the precautions and have all the wherewithal that you need to do the job safely. Now, you can be a crappier, more ill-prepared captain with all those life-saving toys, and you'll probably survive because of all the life-saving toys. But without all of them, you're actually going to have to try a little bit harder. But you can do it. People have been doing it for thousands of years, and they're still doing it today. Here's another one that's worth a look, and this is a boat after my own heart, as you guys probably know, because this is a Carl Hallberg boat. This is the Whitby Hallberg 37, and these have already been around the world more times than you can count, and they will still certainly be found all over the Caribbean right now. This 17,000-pound timeless classic is as seaworthy as she is beautiful, and you can pick these up for just over 20 grand all day long. This one is 30,000, but that's reflected in how well equipped and how good a shape it's already in. And again, we get just a normal roller up front, and it's already got a big rock nut on the bow, so that's going to save you $1,000 right there. We've also got self-steering, a big vane on the back of the boat, so if you are going to be spending days and days on passage, if you choose to do that, you won't be steering the whole time or wasting precious amp hours on the autopilot all day. And speaking of amp hours, we've already got a couple of solar panels on this to help keep the fridge working. This classic Hallberg looks to be in fantastic shape. I've seen these in bad shape. This one is probably one of the best. And I can tell you firsthand that when I started boat shopping, these boats were at the top of my list. But at the time, a nice one was ranging from 50 to even 80 grand. You couldn't ask for a more solid yacht at this price. Inside the Hallberg, we get a very classic double settee layout that you'd expect from a boat that is this narrow. But again, for the price, beggars shouldn't be being all choosy. The head and the V-berth are forward, as you'd expect, in front of the keel-stepped mast, and we have lots and lots of storage. Out back, we get a smaller galley, and it was sort of the trend back in the day that we got these smaller galleys and then a big quarter berth or a sea berth that you might actually find would be the most comfortable place to sleep on this boat if you're by yourself. The owner's already even sprung for a portable 12-volt refrigerator, and if it still works, that's going to save you some cash too. The Hallberg 37 is a boat that cannot be understated if you want to go solo cruising on the cheap, but to do it on a boat that was doing the darn thing before some of you were even born. These are limitless in their ability to go to sea safely, and in a unique place right now, because if you somehow sunk it, you could just replace it with another one right away on the cheap. The downside, of course, is that, while as seaworthy as it gets, these aren't really fast or super maneuverable, and the skinny beam means they won't be super roomy inside. But of course, compromisers. Do you want to get there safely and cheaply? Here's your boat. Hallberg 37, job done. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make all these videos possible. I genuinely couldn't do it without you. A big shout out to all the existing patrons who have gotten us this far. And if you get some value from these videos or you want to help out the channel, please consider becoming a patron. Our next boat today is one that I have kind of a personal connection to, and it's kind of an interesting story because one of these boats is out there cruising right now that I know of as we speak, and it left the east coast of Canada a few months ago, and it's now bombing around the Bahamas with my friend on board captaining it, LA. Now, you may remember LA because he crewed on Lady K back in 2019, and when he got home from that, he bought one of these, a Niagara 35. This example is a 1980 model and already has something we hadn't seen yet today, a furling mainsail. The style that furls into the boom too, so you can still have proper sail shape on your main. This Mark Ellis design is a lot like Lady K, actually. She's 14,000 pounds like Lady K, before outfitting her, of course, so you're going to have the weight to be safe and comfortable in most situations. And we get this elongated, modified fin keel. It's not long enough to be a full keel, but it will track really well. But it doesn't weigh a whole lot, and it has less wetted surface, so it's still going to perform reasonably well as compared to a full keel. In this one, we get a double anchor roller up front and we get a furling jib, as well as a nice clean looking deck in good shape. Although I'm not a huge fan of the shroud location where the chain plates are, sort of in the middle of the side deck. It makes it hard to rush up and down the decks, either put them well inboard or right out at the edge, in my opinion. The Niagara gives us a very nice large cockpit that, when you adorn this with cushions, it's a very nice place to spend time on passage. And we get a large gauge pod with a fold-up table on the pedestal. It looks like we get a slightly modern set of electronics on this boat, including a wind station, and we get coach-top self-tailing winches, which is a great addition, especially if you're by yourself. Inside this boat, it has a really interesting layout. Instead of the big sort of two-person berths, this actually has dual quarter berths at the back and then bunks up in the V berth, which is interesting and just what we might want if we're going to be solo sailing. You can sleep in one or two of them and turn the extra bunks into storage or a workbench or somewhere to put your water toys. Another note on compromise as we look at boats like this is these older boats are very cheap compared to the newer stuff, but they give you that cave effect. Anyone with an old monohull knows what I mean. When you go inside, you have very little light or air coming in, so it's almost like being in a teak and mahogany cave. It's dark, it's often damp, and very disconnected from the outside world. My boat's the same way. Living on it feels very much like living in a cave when you're inside at night and it's all boarded up. For the 35 grand or so that they're asking for this boat, it is a very good value because it has great bones, and it wouldn't take much to add solar and a reasonable battery bank and head south just like LA did. It is a very, very capable and easy boat to use that will certainly get you there. Now, you may notice a trend in the size of boats that I've been pointing out today. They've all been around 35 feet long, and I think I have a few good reasons for that. You can do it on something smaller, though. There's nothing wrong with that idea. One of my favorite sailors I've ever met in all my travels is my friend Wes, who's been cruising for more than a decade, most of the time by himself, on an Albin Vega 27. And if you want to go that route, I urge you to find his channel on YouTube. There's some videos from a few years ago. He's called The Salted Hippie, and he has some great things to say on it. And the reason that I pick boats of about 35 feet is I think that most people need a few things to be happy actually living on a sailboat. First, of course, is the space to comfortably live inside it. I struggle with my 35-footer. I want something bigger for full-time cruising. So I couldn't do anything smaller than 35 myself. Second is weight. And plainly, in this case, the heavier the boat, the better, the safer, the more comfortable at sea, and the more comfortable at anchorage. People don't often think about that, but a light boat bounces and bucks, and it's crazy at anchorage. You don't want it. My personal minimum weight would be about 15,000 pounds, knowing what I know now. Lady K bone stock was 14,000, so I was always sort of wanting for more weight. Now, having said that, if you do want to get into something that's sort of the bottom of our sort of budget window today, or maybe even a little bit cheaper than that, you may want to look at Bayfield. This Bayfield is a Canadian company who made boats very near to where I grew up, and I'm always astounded to sort of see them turn up all over the world. The last one I saw was turned up in Australia. Now, how's that for a blue water boat? This is a 10,000 pound, 32 foot long, Canadian-made piece of sort of pride of ownership. Anybody who has a Bayfield has a big pride of ownership. And this one's the 32. You can always tell a Bayfield by way of its big wood, beautiful bowsprit and its sort of bathtub shape. If I had to pick one word to describe Bayfields, I would use the word stout. Stout because even with the smaller length, they accomplish such a robust and seaworthy strong design, and they build them tough as nails, extra thick, everything. They're like little tanks that sort of spread out all over the planet right after they left the factory. These boats leave things to be desired, of course, in terms of interior space and kind of modern luxuries. You will be sort of cramped inside, and you won't really have a lot of room for entertaining or carrying a bunch of extra junk, but where it counts, this boat has it. It's a very safe and stout little boat that will always get you there and get you home very safely. And Bayfield is a name with a lot of support behind it. These things have a really good cult following on the internet. So you get bonus points because you have an owners group that will help you out when something goes wrong. Nothing on this boat will be reinventing the wheel if you break it, because somebody else has already broken it and already figured out how to fix it and then written about it on the internet. I promise. And if you're going to be all by yourself and you don't really need a bigger interior, you can get one of these things for less than 20 grand. One last thing to say about these sort of cheaper boats. A big compromise you have to make with them is a lack of tankage. You won't be toting around 2 months worth of fresh water or extended ranges of diesel, but those problems can be addressed on the cheap as well. It's not very difficult. First, obviously, jerry cans on the deck. They say you can always tell the cruising sailboats because of all the jerry cans on the deck, and that's absolutely true, especially with these smaller, cheaper sailboats. They don't have the tankage that you would expect at this day and age to sort of get you all over the place without ever having to stop. So the other way that you can combat that problem is a reasonably good dinghy. Yes, you'll be running to the local dock every week or two for more water or more diesel. You need a good stable dinghy with enough power, because when you put 400, 500, 600 pounds of liquid in it and yourself, it needs to be able to go. I would suggest the smallest proper rib that you can fit on deck, if you don't have davits, of course, with at least a 6-horse 2-stroke on the back. The point of this episode started as a chance to look at some of the smaller, cheaper boats that I would choose with the goal in mind. In fact, I did choose with this goal in mind. I still have one right now, the solo cruising through the Caribbean. But the more I thought about this episode, it wasn't just looking at boats anymore. It became about being able to sail through the Caribbean cheaper than some folks would have you believe. Now, you know, the model of this channel has always been the party's wise words: go small, go simple, go now. And some folks out there will flat out demand that you have to buy a certain kind of boat and you have to outfit it in a certain kind of way. And maybe that's because that's what they did. But that doesn't always mean it's the only way. What's more important is to simply do it. Do it now. You might not be around in 10 years, or life may change and you may not be able to go. It's much better to experience this life while you can, instead of rolling the dice on potentially never experiencing it at all for the sake of a bit nicer boat. I get asked a lot for help from people boat shopping right now, so I dedicated a page over at ladyksailingcom where you can go to book an hour of my time if you need me. It's ladyksailingcom/consults. If you like this video, please don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It's free for you and it would really mean the world to me. If you want to continue the conversation, we have an absolutely amazing group of people over on the Lady K Discord channel. I've been on vacation for a week and I've just seen the Discord channel just constant flow of people talking all week. If you want to get in on that, I'll leave a link in the description. Until next week, guys, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down.